Hello everyone and welcome to our presentation on the Fulldome Festival 2020. We're going to talk today about interactive fulldomes, both for production and reviews, as well as for actual usage in domes. Of course, right now I can only show that in a virtual dome, but we hope to bring that to planetariums around us in the near future. First, I'm going to talk a bit about who we are and how we got into this area of interactive content production. My name is Felix. I'm the founder and technical lead of Prefrontal Cortex, a company in Halle an der Saale in Germany. And we've been doing interactive productions for a couple of years now in all kinds of media and scenarios. I'm going to talk about this in a second. So this is our team. We're a pretty young team with a very unique selling point. That is that everyone in our company speaks the same language in terms of both design and development. So we're kind of hybrids between those worlds, which allows us to develop very interesting and unique experiences all the way from concept over design to development and actual production. We've worked with a number of interesting clients over the years. These include Facebook, Microsoft, Intel, and a lot of automotive companies on a wide range of topics. Our main focus with that is always the interactive part and the three-dimensional part. So everything can be touched, everything can be engaged with, and everything can bring a compelling experience to people. And this ranges from VR applications over AR headsets to data visualizations for the web or for large-scale LED and projection scenarios. And this is kind of where we're coming from, and which brought us in contact with a lot of optical tricks and optical work around how do you get images to look right in augmented reality headsets, how do you make a projection mapping that looks compelling to the specific viewpoint of a person, and this brought us basically to this area of Fulldome and immersive content. So first I'm going to show our Immersive Reel. Yeah, so this was some of our work, and one thing in particular that I want to point out, as it was a base for a lot of the things that I'm going to talk about today, is the digital Skylight that you've seen in a couple of shots and that we did together with Intel for their Santa Clara, California headquarters. Basically, they renovated their entire lobby area and brought in pretty large LED surfaces. One is a brand story wall that you see in the lower left, which has depth cameras all around it and is interactive. And the other is a digital Skylight, which is basically a 5-sided cube with about 30 megapixels total that can be used as an interactive surface. And throughout this project, we had a very interesting pipeline in place because all of this was not built at that point, where we were sharing current content iterations and reviewing them right in VR with our clients in Santa Clara. And in the end, everything was output as HubQ videos to be able to run these 30 megapixels on this wall. And we developed a number of interesting use cases for this. Here's a quick overview of how this looks on site. So basically we're in the lobby area, people are sitting around here. You see the brand story wall back there. And up here we have a digital skylight. So, and as you can already see from this video, this poses some interesting optical challenges because all the content needs to be produced in a way where it looks correct from as many positions as possible. And there's like a specific sweet spot in the center where it's dead perfect. And it has all the interesting properties that Fulldome content also has in terms of how fast can it be, how can we bring interesting content to people, and what kind of stuff works best in this kind of half-dome scenario. Here's an outside view of that in our pre-visualization. And you see what I meant here with the optical properties, because of course there's only, like, everything shown here looks perfect from just one specific spot, somewhere in the center of this, as you can see on the right. But of course it also needs to look right from as many other positions as possible, and content needs to be made in a way that distortions are hidden. And one challenge with this project was really producing this content in an interactive way, because we wanted to be able to quickly iterate on what's shown here and be able to do that together with our clients instead of waiting for long render times. So our whole pipeline around this is centered around Unity 3D, basically a game engine that we're in basically every project we're driving that to the limits in terms of what it can do computationally and from graphics. Oh, and for this one, I want to guide you through our process, how we went from basically really slow traditional processes of producing this kind of content to our novel approach, which is super fast and enables us to produce interactive content, basically. So as you all know, traditionally Fulldome content, or like immersive 360 content, is rendered out with cube maps. So someone renders a cube map. This is something that can barely be done in real time. There are ways to make it fast, but it usually comes with a number of downsides, especially that post-processing effects don't work as good, as you always get kind of nasty artifacts on seams. So you lose a lot of the effects like glow, bloom, or volumetrics, at least in the real-time side. And also you lose a lot of quality because you are basically reprojecting these cube maps onto actual faces after the fact. So this is what we did in the beginning. And then we started changing this approach to basically this, where we are using cameras with distorted projection matrices that allow us to render pixel perfect views for each of these cube faces. So basically we have 5 cameras, and each camera renders exactly the area that it needs to, which is already more efficient than the cube map approach because it skips the downsampling and the reprojection from a cube map to these faces. So, and to illustrate this, I can show this here in real time in Unity, like a very simple test setup for this. So basically we have our 3D scene, which is this row of cubes, and we have these rendering surfaces for illustration purposes. And when I move the camera around, what you can see is that the projection cones of the cameras get skewed and distorted to basically render this content in a way that the surfaces are always invariant, so those patterns here, they don't change, but the content changes in a way that it's always correctly projected only from this position here. And I have a little test setup over here that shows what this means. So this is basically a test setup with a single camera and these 2 images reprojected or just displayed. And this is what this camera here can see. So basically it sees this area here. And when I now move our digital rendering camera around, what you can see is that from the point of view of this camera, the content always looks correct if projected. So this is basically a very common trick in projection mapping, where you have a differentiation between where your projectors or your surfaces are and where your viewer is, and you can decide for which viewer to optimize the experience. So this is something we did here as well, basically rendering from a specific viewpoint in the lobby, rendering out those 5 faces. And then we found that actually we're able to optimize this even further by just rendering a single view instead of rendering all 5 views, as one can prove that this is optically basically the same result. So the optical properties are exactly the same. There's no cheating here or something. It's just mathematically equivalent to render this single view and then to reproject it with homography, then to render all these 5 sides. And this leads to a very, very fast process, which we ended up using for this Intel lobby project, where we're basically rendering one single view and then splitting that up in 5 faces on the GPU in real time and rendering these out. And one cool thing about this is that this overcomes a lot of the challenges that traditionally happened with cube maps, because suddenly you can use all post-processing effects again, as it's just one single camera rendering. So there is some quality reduction due to the stretching, but this can be overcompensated by rendering that single view at a higher resolution, which is still much faster than rendering these multiple views out. So why am I talking about all this Skylight stuff if we want to talk about domes? Because the process there can be made in a very similar way, and the challenges are the same. So currently production there is similar. Basically cube map is rendered out either as 6 sides or 5 sides if you skip the floor, or as an equirectangular image, which is then turned into a dome master, basically a semicircle or semisphere projection. And this has similar issues with quality reduction, especially in the ceiling, where like a lot of the focus in a dome scenario is. So, and what we found is basically that we can apply all the knowledge and the tricks and interesting optical properties that we found when working with digital Skylight, and apply them here to dome rendering, which allows us to render this single view with a custom projection matrix and then warp it into a dome master format. So, and it's important to point out here that this is not just a fisheye lens effect or something. It's actually a geometric solution to keep the dome surface invariant. So and this is pretty mathematical, so I'm going to explain it in the next slide a bit more. So what you see here on the left is basically a camera moving below a half dome or half sphere. And you see that, of course, the rendered image is changing a lot. The outer boundaries stay the same because we're applying our same trick with the skewed projection matrices here. So the circular area here stays identical. But the inside shifts. And this is obviously not what we want, because we want our dome surface to be invariant to changes of the viewer position into the camera. And so what we did is basically figure out the correct math and the correct shaders to keep this surface invariant. So what you can see on this side here is that this camera, which is still moving around, renders an image, and then the distortion effect is applied on top of that and brings that back into a dome master format. So, and you can see as the camera gets like super close to the horizon right now, you can see that quality is visibly lower, because there's of course some oversampling and undersampling depending on how far the camera is from this dome. So, but again, this can be compensated by rendering this single view as at a much higher resolution as usually was possible with cube maps. So an interesting thing here is that this is still all possible in real time, which allows us to produce very interesting scenarios based around the fact that we now just have to render one single camera and can warp that into a correct dome master output. Yeah, and that brings me to the next part here, which is not so much theoretical, but I actually want to show you kind of what we've been working on with this. And what I briefly showed in the beginning is basically our Unity setup for this, where we have a viewer application, which is, of course, a stand-in for a real planetarium. And the viewer runs on desktop or on VR headsets such as Oculus Quest, and can simulate dome environments of different sizes, different seating setups, basically all the kinds of things that you want to try your content out with. And then we have content applications that are streaming their output over NDI if it's a network machine, or via Spout if it's on the same machine, and that are producing 4K or as high as possible or as high as necessary dome master outputs that can be either played back in the virtual or in a real planetarium, or that can be recorded for future use. So to show you how this looks, we have our interactive Kelp forest here. And Kelp forest is one of the applications that we developed for the Intel lobby as content that is both interactive and immersive in the Skylight. Basically, we have like a little ecosystem here with a lot of fish and a lot of plants that is tailored towards basically producing this kind of immersive output. So, and what's happening here is that this is rendered via Spout to a 4K dome master, which is then streamed over to this Unity application on the left side here, where we have our simulated dome environment. And actually, I'm wearing a VR headset right now and am able to look around in this dome. So, and as I said, we have on the viewing side, we have the ability to choose different sizes and different chair setups and stuff like this, just basically to being able to judge how this content works and feels. So I can like switch that out and try all these different sizes of domes here. And something interesting is also that, of course, we can move around in VR with this. So I'm able to, for example, scale myself down and view this from the outside, or go back in, or choose a very specific viewing position to judge the content from how it would look if I would be sitting right in this chair here. And this is already pretty cool, but the best part about this is, of course, that the whole process is real time. So I can actually go in and start modifying my scene here, and I can start moving things around. Let's see where this one is. Or I can start adding objects here that are rendered in real time and streamed over, so I can actually judge how they feel and how I would need to position my content. So, and all this happens in real time and allows basically a very cool workflow for producers and directors, because you're able to judge your content in real time and make changes to it. So if I if I go in here and start moving this giant rock around, I can directly judge the result of the composition basically, and how this influences the scenery and what the viewer wants to see. And another thing we have in here is a day and night cycle. So I can basically go in and change the entire atmosphere here based on time of day, as we do in the Intel lobby, or based on different factors like letting a show operator control what is shown. So, and this is of course not things that are very specific to this application here, but that this workflow of being able to work interactively in a dome environment allows for. Okay, next thing I want to show is a little bit about interaction, because content is not the only thing that we can do here and produce nicely, but we're also able to provide interesting interactions, both by basically a host, so a person that would be using or would be standing in the planetarium using, for example, a Kinect or another motion tracking device, and influencing the scenario around them. And we can achieve this by basically syncing the physical space of the planetarium with a digital space, which could, for example, be the space of the Kinect, or could be the space of a VR headset, and control everything with like MIDI controllers and stuff like that as possible with other applications. And another interesting use case, of course, is that the audience can influence the experience through different means, either through smartphones or through lights or through other stuff. And this is cool because it's a very unique selling point to being able to say that no two shows are the same, and whenever you're there, you're actually influencing the show. Okay, and an example that I want to show of this, let me switch over to another application here. An example that I want to show for this is we have some abstract and particle stuff here that I can cycle through, and I want to show this specific one where we have a little comet, a little star. I'm gonna maximize this one here so that you can see me. And while I'm in VR, I'm actually able to influence this and move the little comet around, right in the dome scenario, and right being able to do this live. It feels very empowering, and we can't wait to show this and have everyone try out in an actual dome scenario. So basically what's happening here is that my hand and my controller position are streamed over from the viewer application to the content applications. And this can of course be done with a number of interesting parameters, like not just my position and stuff like that, but also other things that could be influenced from the viewer. So a couple other ones that I can show here because they look so cool in VR is, for example, this jellyfish effect. Because we're able to iterate really quickly on these kinds of effects and really trying to figure out what is the biggest impact that we can make to have people feel that they're in a scenario here, that they're in an interactive world. And what we did here basically is tune this so that it looks and feels really volumetric. And this is also something that all these projective approaches that I have shown before help with, because we can basically adjust live how the content is perceived and how compressed or uncompressed the space is here. And this is really something that comes from projection mapping. In projection mapping, you basically have the ability to compress space depending on where you want your viewer to be and what kind of feeling of space you want your viewers to have. And this is really not possible with a cube map rendering, because with a cube map rendering, you have this fixed viewpoint in the center, and you can only move the entire cube map around. So what we can do here is we can do more. We can actually move the viewpoint of the viewer around and get an accurate representation of how this would look for that specific viewer. Another thing that this allows for is optimizing the viewing experience for other positions in the planetarium than just the center. So we can like shift this to the side, and you can see in VR that basically the perspective here changes, and we can optimize this for a viewer that, for example, sits in a different seat. Like I could get over here and sit right on the edge. And now the projection could be adjusted so that this looks correct from my viewing position. And what you can see here is basically that from my viewing position, I now have the feeling that this is this giant slice in the air, and it looks correct from my position here. And this is of course not something you can do for every viewer at the same time, but you could allow people to, at some point of the show, have their viewpoint be the perfect one, or have a very special experience for them in their seat, or being able to have a class of kids and everyone can like manipulate from their own seat in their specific viewpoint. Yeah, and I'm just going to go through some of the effects here. And this is really something that is super fast to adjust and tune now, because we're working in a real-time environment that allows us to test these things out and try how it feels, adjust sizes and scales, and just really figure out what great scenarios are here. So this is one I like a lot. It's basically an abstract sun that's shining onto everyone here. And I can go really in and say, okay, let me sit here and enjoy this one. So as you see here, this is really a three-dimensional scene that can be manipulated in real time. I can adjust everything here, including colors, including the effects that are happening here, up to the point that I can go into the actual particle system and start doing live changes here. And basically manipulate this entire system and change its properties and stuff like that. And this is super powerful when directing content, because you have such direct influence instead of waiting for a render to finish and then just talking about the effects of that. Oh yeah, here's another abstract one with an abstract planet with rings, where it's also super interesting to being able to go in here and start manipulating this separately, or have it fly over me, and all these kinds of things that you see in current dome scenarios, but they're so much quicker to try out and play around with now. And I think that concludes our little ride into the world of interactive dome production as we see it. And I really hope we get the chance later this year or early next year to show this to all of you at the Fulldome Festival and have you try out, because it's interactive. So you can actually stand in the planetarium and interact with the dome around you, which is a very powerful feeling that we'd love to bring to more people. So I'm Felix. Thank you for listening, and yeah, reach out if you have any questions or remarks or want to work together, because we would love to not only use this for our own content productions, but give this to the hands of other producers and help people produce more interactive content with faster iterations. Thank you.